I was holding the roast pan with both hands when I heard Genevieve whisper to Lyle that the meat looked dry again. She said it in that flat tone of hers, the kind that cuts more because it's meant to sound like a fact, not an insult. I didn't flinch. I just kept slicing. The roast beef was her late request after all. She wanted it medium rare, no pink showing, her words. But now it was dry. The kids were busy swiping at their phones, the twins yelling over each other about something YouTube-related. Lyle was pouring himself another glass of wine, asking his wife if she needed help setting the table. She didn't. I had already set the table an hour earlier. I moved quietly between them all, topping off the mashed potatoes, fixing the napkins that no one noticed had fallen. I saw my reflection in the sliding glass door. Soft cardigan hair, pulled back apron still on. I looked like someone's grandmother who worked part-time at the church kitchen, the kind of woman people are polite to at the store, but never actually see. Genevieve brushed past me without a glance, reaching for the serving spoon like I was just in the way. Lyle smiled at her the way he used to smile at me when he was 5 and needed help tying his shoes. Now I got that same smile if I cooked the beef right. They were hosting the dinner, but it was still my food, my hands, my ingredients. I had spent the morning prepping while they napped through brunch and took a stroll to the farmer's market for show. No one asked me to do it, but if I didn't, no one else would. That's the thing about family routines. You stop offering, and people just assume you were born doing it. I took my seat at the end of the table, the one closest to the kitchen as always. No one said a word when I sat down. No one looked. The conversation flowed like I wasn't there. Genevieve talked about her new yoga instructor. Lyle updated everyone on his app's beta launch. I watched them laugh toast, dip their bread into gravy I had made from scratch. The only time they paused was when the youngest dropped a fork and I bent to pick it up. And I thought not for the first time that it is possible to disappear right in the middle of your own family. So let me ask you this. Ever had a dinner where you were the one who cooked, served, cleaned, and still felt like the unpaid help in your own bloodline? You might want to stay for what happens next. Because what they didn't know, sitting there in their nice clothes with their nice words, was that I had already decided. This was going to be the last meal I ever made for any of them. The gravy had cooled, the plates were mostly cleared. The kids had wandered off to the den, and Genevieve was stacking leftover containers like she had suddenly discovered the joy of helping. Lyle leaned against the counter, nursing the last of the wine, his shirt half untucked. I was rinsing pans, trying to be quiet. The house was quiet in a way that made every drawer pull sound sharp. Then I heard it. The soft scrape of the silverware drawer, not the one in the island, but the built-in one under the microwave. I glanced over. Genevieve stood with the drawer half open. Her brow creased fingers, holding a yellow envelope I hadn't seen in months. She turned it over in her hands, like she was trying to decide whether to read it or pretend she hadn't found it. I dried my hands and walked toward her. She stepped back without saying anything, holding the envelope a little too casually. I took it from her without comment. It was a statement from a private settlement trust. A thick one from the legal team that had handled the class action suit I joined years ago. Back then, nobody paid attention when a woman like me filed complaints. Nobody thought court stenographers had anything to sue over. But enough of us came forward, enough stories lined up. And after a long silence, there was a number. 21 million. It had arrived by mail 3 months earlier. I'd read it once, then slid it under some old manuals I kept in that drawer. I didn't hide it. I just didn't advertise it either. Genevieve didn't ask what it was. She didn't have to. Her eyes moved from the envelope to my face, then flicked toward Lyle as if calculating a move in real time. I waited, but she didn't speak, just handed it back and turned away, heading to the hallway like nothing had happened. I put the letter on the counter and covered it with a dish towel. Lyle never noticed. He was too busy telling me about some startup he was advising. I nodded at the right moments. My hands still felt damp, even though I had dried them minutes earlier. Later, as I packed up my overnight bag, I noticed Genevieve had left her laptop charging near the guest room. A file was open on the screen. It looked like a shared document titled Household Budget 2024. I didn't click on it, but I saw my name listed in one of the rows, under contributions. It was the first time I realized I had become a line item in someone else's financial plan. And I knew then that she would not be the last to open that drawer. Not after what she saw. Not after what she suspected. Something had shifted in that house. And it was only a matter of time before everything that had stayed quiet for too long began making noise. Breakfast the next morning felt quieter than it should have. The kids were still asleep upstairs, the dog scratching half-heartedly at the back door. I made coffee like I always did. Poured 2 mugs left, one on the table for whoever came in first. It used to be Lyle, but this time it was Genevieve. She didn't say good morning, just sat down, took a sip, and stared at her phone. Her fingers moved slowly, like her brain was somewhere else entirely. She didn't touch the toast I had buttered and left on a plate beside her. Lyle came in a few minutes later, half awake and rubbing his neck. He mumbled something about bad pillows, grabbed a banana, and kissed Genevieve on the top of her head. She didn't look up. There was tension, but not the kind that explodes. The kind that settles in quiet corners and grows heavy. By mid-morning, Lyle offered to drive me home. I told him not to worry, that I'd call a ride. He pressed again, but I insisted. I said I needed some air. He nodded a little too quickly and left to get dressed. Genevieve watched the whole exchange from the doorway. Just before I zipped up my bag, she stopped me in the hallway. Her voice was calm, a little too practiced. She said she hadn't meant to invade my privacy. Said she was surprised by what she found. And then very casually she asked if I had considered setting up a trust. Something to ensure long-term security. Not just for me, but for the whole family. She mentioned estate taxes, long-term planning, phrases pulled from financial blogs and estate attorney ads. It was the first time she'd ever spoken to me like I was the client and she was the planner. I told her I had everything handled. She smiled, the kind of smile that ends before it begins. In the car, Lyle was quieter than usual. He asked if I was doing okay, if I needed anything. I said no. I looked out the window the rest of the way. He didn't push, but I could feel something different in his tone. Less warmth, more calculation. He dropped me off and didn't walk me in. Just a quick wave, then gone. That night I sat at my kitchen table and reread the letter. It was still there, crisp and direct. No flattery. Just numbers, clauses, signatures. What it represented wasn't just money. It was years, years of being overlooked, of being assumed. I thought back to the dinner, to the fork I picked up off the floor, to the line item in Genevieve's spreadsheet. Contributions. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a resource, a pool of value to be managed. And I realized that silence was no longer the safe choice. It hadn't protected me. It had trained them to treat me like background, like wallpaper that never moves and never complains. There was going to be a conversation, whether they liked it or not. But it wasn't going to happen at their table. It would begin on my terms. And it would not be quiet. It started with a knock at my door 3 days later. Not a loud one. Just 3 soft taps, followed by silence. When I opened it, Genevieve was standing there alone, holding a folder and wearing the same careful smile she used when talking to clients she didn't quite trust. She didn't waste time. Said she was just stopping by, had something she thought I might want to look at. She held the folder out, no pleasantries, no small talk. Inside was a 10-page document titled Family Asset Management and Succession Planning, printed color-coded, sectioned by roles and responsibilities. My name was highlighted more than once. She stayed standing, said it wasn't urgent, but it would be wise to start thinking ahead. She mentioned my age gently, brought up stability, legacy, said this was about protecting what I had built, that we were all on the same team. I nodded and said nothing. She left the folder on my table and promised to follow up in a week. When she walked away, I didn't close the door right away. I watched her get into her car, type something on her phone, and drive off without looking back. The next morning, Lyle called. He didn't mention Genevieve's visit. Instead, he talked about how busy work had been, how fast the kids were growing, how they'd been thinking about the future lately. Then he shifted slowly, said that maybe we should talk sometime about estate planning, that it was just practical, that things could get complicated down the road if we didn't sort them out now. I told him I'd think about it. I hung up and stared at the document, still sitting unopened on my kitchen table. That afternoon, I called a woman I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Jody. We met working depositions back in the 90s, both of us trying to raise kids and hold our own in rooms filled with men who never looked us in the eye. She picked up on the third ring, her voice older but unmistakable. I told her I might be looking for a bit of guidance. She said she still had connections, asked me to send her what I had. I emailed her a scan of the folder and the settlement letter. Within hours, she replied with 2 names, a trust attorney and a financial journalist. I printed both. That evening, I sat on the back porch with a cup of mint tea, listening to the hum of distant traffic and the soft creak of the swing. The document sat beside me. I read every word. Each line reinforced what I already knew. It wasn't about protecting me. It was about positioning me, about making my name a placeholder for their benefit, not out of malice, but out of pure, polished, practiced entitlement. They didn't want me to vanish, not yet. They wanted me visible just enough to sign what they needed. I closed the folder, stood up, and went inside. The hallway light flicked on automatically, casting a long shadow across the floor. I had no intention of disappearing, but they were going to learn what it meant when the quiet one in the room finally stopped cooperating. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the wall, its low hum ticking like a clock I couldn't quiet. The folder sat on the dresser, still shut, but somehow louder than anything in the room. I had already read it twice. I didn't need to read it again. What I needed was space to breathe. At 2 in the morning, I got up and made a pot of coffee. It was too strong, but I drank it anyway. I stood by the window, watching the faint glow of streetlights stretch across the sidewalk. The neighborhood was still. Every house quiet behind drawn curtains, all except mine. By 3, I had opened my laptop. I wrote a letter. Not to them, not to Lyle or Genevieve, but to myself. A statement of clarity. I wrote down everything I had noticed over the last few months. The way decisions were made without me. The way I had become something between a burden and a line of credit. The subtle shift from family to obligation. I typed slowly, deliberately. I listed the appointments they had made for me without asking. The prescriptions they filled without checking. The mail they collected always by accident, but somehow never unopened. It had been building. The questions about memory, the concerned looks when I repeated a story, the soft suggestions to write things down. Genevieve bringing up power of attorney as if it were just a safety net, and now a full proposal to manage my estate. Not after I passed, but while I was still standing. I saved the letter, then opened a new document. This one was different. I began drafting instructions, passwords, account numbers, contact lists. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. I didn't trust them to look out for me anymore. I trusted myself and the people I chose. I worked until just past 5. Then I shut the laptop and folded the printed draft into an envelope. I placed it inside a cookbook no one had ever touched. Second shelf behind the canned peaches. That morning the phone rang. It was Lyle. His voice was calm but too rehearsed. He said he and Genevieve had spoken to someone, a financial planner. Just informal, just advice. They thought it might be helpful to meet. Nothing binding, just a conversation. I said I was busy. He hesitated, then said he understood. But I could hear it, the pressure behind his patience. That night, I walked through the house, turning off lights, one by one. The rooms felt heavier than usual. Familiar, but not safe. I paused by the hall mirror and studied my reflection. Same face, same lines. But something behind the eyes had shifted. I no longer looked like someone waiting to be asked. I looked like someone preparing for a storm. Not with fear, but with a steady kind of knowing. The kind that comes when you stop hoping they'll change and start protecting the parts of yourself they never bothered to see. The next morning, I took out my old voice recorder, the same one I used years ago during deposition work, tucked in my briefcase under a stack of court transcripts. It was scratched, but still reliable. I changed the batteries, tested it once, then placed it on the kitchen table next to a notebook and a warm mug of black tea. I sat in silence for a long time before I pressed record. My voice came out steady, not loud, not rehearsed, just mine. I began by saying my full name, the date, the time. Then I talked. I spoke about the letter, the settlement, the way it came in the mail without warning, how I had tucked it away, unsure what to do with it. I described the weight of that number on paper and the heavier silence that followed once someone else saw it. I told the story of that dinner, of the drawer, of the envelope. I spoke about Genevieve's visit, her folder, her polite urgency. I did not raise my voice. I didn't use blame. I recorded facts. Each detail stitched together like pieces of testimony. Clean, clear, documented. I ended the recording after 21 minutes. Then I made another. This one was shorter, just 5 minutes. I talked about my intentions, about where my money would go, the organizations I had followed for years, the legal steps I was taking. I made it plain. My choices were mine. Not a negotiation, not a suggestion, a declaration. I saved both files to a flash drive and labeled it ME, Archive. Later that afternoon, I called Jodie again. She answered before the first ring finished. I told her I was ready to meet those names she had sent. She gave me times, places, told me what to bring, what to expect. Then she paused, said she had someone else I might want to talk to. Not a lawyer, not a planner, someone who worked in radio. I told her to send the contact. After we hung up, I opened my laptop. I stared at the blank screen for a while. Then I typed 3 words at the top of a new file. Not your mother's wallet. The title wasn't clever. It wasn't polished. But it was honest. And something about it made me feel like I had just opened a window in a locked room. I spent the rest of the afternoon drafting outlines, not episodes, not yet. Just pieces, memories, stories, little scenes that had sat too long in silence. At dinner, I ate alone and without sound. No television, no music, just the rhythm of my fork and the occasional clink of the glass. It was the calmest meal I had had in weeks. That night, I backed up the flash drive and put it in a safety box under my bed. I closed the drawer, turned off the light, and sat on the edge of the bed. I had not yet spoken to Lyle or Genevieve again, but I had started telling the truth, and the difference between the two was already changing everything. Jody met me outside the building with 2 coffees in hand and a grin like we hadn't lost a single year. She looked older, sure. So did I. But there was a lightness in her eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. She handed me the black one without asking how I took it. She remembered. We took the elevator up to the 5th floor. No sign on the door, just a small buzzer and a mailbox slot. Inside was a modest studio. No fancy equipment. Just shelves, soft lighting, and sound panels lining the walls like folded blankets. It didn't smell like a business. It smelled like someone's project that had become something more. Jody introduced me to Claire, a producer who used to run live storytelling nights downtown. She had short grey hair, a sharp laugh, and a way of listening that made you want to keep talking. I handed her the flash drive. She plugged it in, listened to the first 2 minutes, and nodded without looking up. She said we should record a pilot. That afternoon, we sat in a small booth with a single mic and no script. Claire asked simple questions. I answered in pieces. She didn't push, just let me talk. I told her about the envelope, the letter, the proposal, the moment I realized I had become a project instead of a person. By the time we stepped out, I felt lighter, like I had put something down without even noticing I had been carrying it. Claire said she'd edit the pilot and upload it under a new channel. No promotion, no pressure, just to see what would happen. 3 days later, the episode was live. No one knew it was me. I didn't use my name. I didn't mention Lyle or Genevieve. I didn't give dates or cities. But I told the truth, in my own voice. About dinners where no one looked up. About spreadsheets that listed me under liabilities. About the moment I stopped believing silence kept peace. At first the numbers were small. A few listens. Then a dozen. Then a few hundred. Then it started spreading. People shared it on forums. Someone clipped a quote and posted it on a caregiving blog. One morning, I opened my inbox and found 27 messages from women I didn't know. Most of them older, some younger. All of them said the same thing in different words. They had been there too. They had kept quiet too. They had waited for someone else to notice what had slowly been taken from them. That night, I opened a new folder and labeled it Episode 2. The working title was simple: The Fork That Fell. Because sometimes it's not the shouting that breaks you. It's the moment when the sound of a fork on the floor is louder than your own name, and no one bends to help except you. The second episode took less than 2 hours to record. I didn't stop once. It wasn't planned. It was ready. I spent the next week building structure around the voice I had just let out into the world. The podcast was growing faster than anyone expected. Claire called to say we had passed 10,000 downloads. I thanked her, but the number didn't surprise me. There was a hum building beneath everything. Not a shout. Not a wave. Just a steady hum that came from being understood. But I didn't start this to be understood. I started it because I was being erased. So while Claire handled the edits, and while the inbox kept filling with stories from women who had learned to carry their own silence, I turned my focus to something else. I called the trust attorney Jody recommended. Her name was Eileen. She spoke directly with no condescension. I sent her my files. She read every word. The next day, she suggested we begin setting up a layered estate structure, one that gave no power to anyone by default. Every detail would be spelled out, every move documented, no assumptions, no access granted unless I said so in writing in advance with 2 witnesses and a notary. Then we added one more thing, a clause stating that any party attempting to challenge the terms of the trust would be disqualified from receiving any distribution at all. I asked if that was enforceable. She said it was. It felt like closing a door gently and locking it from the inside. I moved next to the house. I met with a local realtor and told him I was considering a sale, but only if we could do it quietly. He understood. Discretion was a specialty, he said. Within 3 days, we had 2 offers. By the end of the week, the papers were signed. The house would close in a month. I would be gone before the holidays. I did not tell Lyle or Genevieve. Instead, I mailed them a small envelope. Inside was a typed letter, short and polite, saying I was making some changes to simplify my life, and that all financial and legal matters would be handled by a professional from now on. I gave Eileen's name and office number. Nothing more. No apology. No explanation. No room for negotiation. I watched the mail truck pull away that afternoon with both letters in its bin. The driver didn't even glance at me. That night I uploaded episode 3. It was called The Budget Line. I told the story of the spreadsheet, the one I had seen on Genevieve's laptop, how my name sat under contributions, how the formatting made it clear I had been accounted for, not as a person, but as a potential. I spoke slowly, carefully, not with anger, just with clarity. And I ended it with this. You can give your life to people and still be seen as a placeholder. But when you take your life back, when you claim it in full, the silence they counted on starts to collapse. And that's when the real noise begins. The first call came from an unknown number. I didn't answer. A voicemail followed. Genevieve's voice clipped and tight. She said she had received my letter, said she respected my decision but had some concerns. She asked that I call her back to clarify the changes. There was no mention of the trust, no mention of the house. The second message came the next morning, this time from Lyle, softer, less polished. He said he hadn't realized things had gotten so distant, said he missed talking to me, said he hoped I wasn't doing anything I'd regret later. I let it play out. Then I deleted it. By the end of the week, the calls had slowed. The messages stopped. Claire called me instead. Episode 3 had passed 50,000 listens. Newsletters were linking it. A women's health podcast had replayed a clip. There were posts about it on message boards for caregivers, retired nurses, even financial independence groups. Something had cracked open, not loud, just wide. I went to the store that afternoon and noticed a woman in the frozen aisle staring at me too long. She didn't say anything, just nodded once and walked away. That night I recorded another episode, not a long one, just a letter really. A thank you to the women who had written in. I didn't use their names, just read their words with permission. One had said she left a controlling son's home and moved into a studio apartment with a window that got morning light. Another said she had stopped wiring money to her grown children every month. She didn't know what she would do next. She just knew she could finally hear her own voice again. The next day, Lyle showed up at my door. I didn't let him in. He stood on the porch in his work clothes, holding a coffee cup he never sipped from. Said he didn't understand what was happening. Said I was acting like a stranger. Said he didn't want things to get ugly. I told him everything was already in motion, that if he had questions, he could contact Eileen. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't push past the threshold. But something in his eyes changed, like he realized he no longer had a foothold. When he left, I sat in the same chair I had used the night the letter arrived. I opened my laptop and saw a message from a producer at a national radio program. They wanted to talk about syndication, about stories from older women who had never had a mic. I read the email twice before closing it. That weekend, Genevieve made her move. She posted a long note on a family group page, said she was worried about me, said I had been forgetful, paranoid, suggested I might be under pressure from outside influences. No names, just enough implication to raise eyebrows. I didn't respond. But episode 4 already had a title. It was called The Kindness of Concern, and it started with a single sentence. They never cared about my silence until I used it. Then they called it confusion. The envelope came on a Tuesday, slipped under my door in the late morning. No knock, no doorbell. Just a pale blue rectangle resting against the welcome mat, like someone hoped I would step on it before I saw it. There was no return address. The handwriting was Lyle's. Neat, slanted slightly left, the way he used to write his name in third grade. The paper was thick, the kind you buy when you're trying to say something without raising your voice. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the counter while I finished my tea. Folded laundry, watered the front porch plants. Only when the day had settled into a quiet hum did I sit down and slide my finger under the flap. It was a letter, 2 pages. No apology in the beginning, just a memory. He wrote about being 10 and watching me testify in court. Said I had seemed taller that day, like the room adjusted around me. Said he remembered being proud, but also scared because I had looked powerful in a way he didn't understand. He said he had been thinking about that version of me a lot lately. He wrote that he never meant to reduce me to a set of figures on a spreadsheet, that he hadn't realized how deep the shift had gone, that he had allowed it, maybe even encouraged it, that silence had made things easier, and that comfort had turned to entitlement before he ever noticed it. There were no excuses, only confessions. He said Genevieve was scared, that she felt exposed. But that wasn't an excuse either. He didn't ask for money, didn't ask to meet. He just wrote that he saw what I had done, not just with the trust, but with the voice I had found, that others had found through me. And then he wrote one scene that didn't fit with the rest of the letter. He said, "I never knew you were lonely." That was the only sentence I read twice. I folded the letter back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Not hidden, not displayed, just stored. That evening I went for a walk around the block. The breeze was light. Someone was grilling 2 houses down. The smoke drifted slow and clean. When I got home, I opened my notebook and wrote the title for episode 5. It was called The Letter I Didn't Expect. I didn't record it that night. Instead, I sat by the window and let the silence stretch a little longer. It felt different now. Not empty, not expectant. Just mine. For the first time in a long while, I didn't need to say anything out loud. Not because I had nothing to say, but because, for once, someone had spoken in my language, and they didn't ask to be forgiven. They just wanted to be heard. Genevieve emailed the following Thursday. No subject line, no greeting. Just a single paragraph that read more like a press release than a message between 2 people who had shared holidays and hospital waiting rooms. She said she had been reflecting, said she had listened to the episodes, said she admired the courage it took to speak out. Then came the part she meant me to notice. She proposed an idea, a collaboration. She wanted to be part of the podcast, said it would be powerful to include multiple perspectives, that it could reach even more women if it told both sides of the story, hers and mine. She pitched it as healing, a way to rebuild, to bridge. I read it 3 times. The language was polished. She'd done her research, mentioned audience expansion, potential media interest, the growing wave of second-act storytelling. She knew the lingo. She knew what would appeal to producers. She even referenced the episode about the spreadsheet. She never mentioned the envelope, never addressed what started it all. She said she was willing to be honest, willing to be vulnerable, willing to admit where things had gone wrong. She attached a voice memo. I didn't open it. Instead, I replied with a single sentence. I said that what I had created was not a platform for branding. Then I logged out of the account and closed the laptop. That evening I didn't record. I didn't write. I sat on the back steps with a blanket and listened to the wind move through the trees. Somewhere nearby, a sprinkler clicked on. The sky shifted from gold to slate. My tea went cold beside me. Genevieve's proposal hadn't shocked me. It hadn't even disappointed me. It just confirmed what I already knew, that some people apologize by finding a new angle, a softer spotlight, a way to stay in the frame. But not everything needs to be a project. Not everything broken should be rebuilt with the same hands that cracked it. When I went inside, I deleted the email. No announcement, no reply, no counteroffer, just a quiet decision. I had told my story not for attention, not for reconciliation, but for release. And now even the person who once dismissed me from my own dinner table wanted to stand beside me as if she had always known. But silence has weight, and I had learned how to carry it with dignity. There was no room in this new voice for performance, only truth. And truth, once it finds its shape, does not make space for reenactments. I moved out quietly, just as the realtor said I could. The house closed faster than expected. The boxes were labelled in thick black marker, stacked neatly in the back of a moving van that didn't belong to any company with a logo. The keys were left on the counter. No note. The new place sits near the water, tucked behind a stretch of coast where the wind smells like salt and cedar. It is smaller, simpler. One story. No attic full of old paper. No stairs for people to whisper up or down. The mornings begin with birds I never knew by name. The afternoons pass with books half read and teacups half full. I don't miss the echo of other people's expectations filling the walls. I record once a week now. The podcast has become something I never planned for. Women send me letters from towns I have never heard of. Men write too, sometimes quietly asking how to listen better. There is a shelf in my office for the printed messages. Not for display, just for keeping. Claire checks in often. She says the audience wants more. Syndication offers are growing, invitations arrive. Panel talks, book proposals. I nod. I thank her, I tell her maybe later. For now, I still prefer the booth, still prefer the slow way of telling. The latest episode was short, just 10 minutes. I read from a letter I wrote years ago but never mailed, not a declaration, just a memory. When it ended, I left a long pause. Sometimes silence says more than anything. I have not spoken to Genevieve again. Lyle sent one more message, short and kind. No requests, no plans. Just said he hoped the coast was as peaceful as I had hoped it would be. I didn't reply, not from distance, but from completion. Because some stories are finished not when everything is explained, but when nothing more needs to be. And here in this small house by the ocean, I have learned the difference between being alone and being free. Freedom is quiet, but not empty. It is full of the voice I thought I had lost, and I intend to keep using it. If this story found you at a time when your silence has been too loud, I want you to know you're not alone in it. You can write me, you can record a note, or you can sit in your own quiet and let it speak to you first. Either way, your voice matters. And whenever you're ready, it's here waiting, just like I was.